Much for joining us. This is the first video we've done in a while. Hello, Angela. So good to see
Hey,
you.
Victoria, good to see you.
And welcome to our chat on the very latest science in metabolic health and ketogenic metabolic therapies. We're really excited to dive into this talk today. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you comment below. Let us know if you have questions. We're really excited to start the conversation back up because it's been a while since we've popped our faces up on the screen, but there's a lot to talk about. So, we're going to be kind of covering the most recent research. I think for all of us, 2020 felt like a bit of a train wreck, to be totally honest. However, it was really, despite the adversity that we all faced, it was a really incredible year of progress when it comes to the research on metabolic health. And so maybe, Angela, you want to talk a little bit about how even though despite these crazy times, some of the most beautiful and incredible things come out of adversity and situations like 2020 and part of maybe 2021.
Yeah,
So if you want to talk a little bit more.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was really incredible to see, when we were putting together this ebook which we Victoria I know can show you in just a second, something that we had this idea sometime mid of last year. We realized there's just so much cool research coming out right now. We really need somewhere to direct people that kind of is a central location that kind of touches on a little bit of everything that came out last year. And when we were working on it, I was just shocked to see how much research was published. It was one of those situations where we really couldn't even begin to touch on every article that came out last year. So we tried to kind of give a little smattering of information from new and unique areas of research, just to give a taste of what is going on out there. But it was incredible to see, and I in the scientific community, a lot of us kind of laughed about how last year a lot of publications came out, in part because we were forced to kind of slow down a little bit. And when scientists are able to slow down, then they can work on writing those papers, right? So we get a whole lot of publications out from this data that's been sitting around for years. So it was actually 2020 was an incredible year for metabolic therapy research being published. And we were just really thrilled to be able to kind of collate this work in one central location, and make it available for people to kind of see what's going on.
Yeah, it was a really incredible year in that sense. There was a lot of Zooming, a lot of writing, and it worked out well. And we put together this ketogenic metabolic therapy ebook. We've become, I would say, even more passionate about educating the public about the science on metabolic health and therapies, hence why this is completely free. You can actually find it on our website, metabolichealthsummit.com. If you click on videos, which will provide you with a whole slew of great information. We'll also post the link below where you can find this, but it's completely free. And it explores a variety of areas of research. So we didn't want to just stick to, one. It's fascinating. Metabolic therapies are being looked at across a variety of areas, which really, when you talk about it to somebody who might not know a whole lot about the ketogenic diet and ketosis and fasting and all those things, it almost sounds kind of like it's not real because of the many applications and potential that it has. So to kind of give you a brief summary, and then we're going to dive into some of these articles, and don't mind my weird green screen here, but we have a variety of topics from neurological health to cancer to metabolic dysfunction. So each section has a variety of articles, and we're going to cover some of those today. We also cover cancer. We also cover the clinical application, human optimization, and aging. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the areas that we found particularly interesting and kind of have a little bit of a discussion about them, but you can find the rest of them. There's like literally 100 plus in this book. So you'll definitely want to check it out after this. But let's start with neurological health, because this is sort of an area that was, metabolic therapies was really introduced in this space like 100 years ago in the field of, epilepsy. And so it's been sort of more recently expanded into other areas of neurology. You're looking at like Alzheimer's, mental health, all of these really, even traumatic brain injury. And that really kind of brings us to our first article that I found probably one of the most fascinating. Is it involves spinal cord injury, which you typically wouldn't think about metabolic therapies maybe being used in that capacity. But let's talk about it. The article is called Neuroprotective Effects of a Ketogenic Diet in Combination with Exogenous Ketone Salt salts following acute spinal cord injury. So this is super fascinating. I think we should talk a little bit about what might be at play with this. The researchers used the ketogenic diet and ketones. If you want to explain
Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
neuroinflammation or where we're going with this.
Yeah, it was a really cool article. There's been a lot of heightened interest in this kind of area, neuronal injury, either some kind of insult, including stroke, but then also physical traumatic injury as well, looking at the potential for ketosis to be therapeutic in those settings. And in part because, so if you think about it, the brain is very, very energetically demanding. So the brain uses about 20% of our energy on a daily basis, but it only makes up about 2% of our body weight. So it's highly energetically demanding organ and requires constant flow of energy to support the processes of the brain. Um, and it's really incredible. You see that in neurological insults and diseases, kind of across the board, you tend to see this kind of energetic crisis occurring. And then you also see some other characteristic issues, things like mitochondrial dysfunction, neuroinflammation, and oxidative stress. And all of these are kind of areas that we've seen research coming out, especially in the past decade, that ketogenic therapies seem to maybe be able to target therapeutically. And so in this study, the authors were using a rat cervical contusion model. So it's an impact injury at the C5 spinal cord level. And they had previously shown that the ketogenic diet had improved outcomes in this model. But they were a little worried about the time post-injury to be able to induce ketosis. And they thought, well, maybe if we supplement this ketogenic diet with ketone salts, we can induce a more significant ketosis in a quicker time manner. And so that's why they tested this combination of ketone salts and ketogenic diet. Interestingly, in the model, they didn't actually see a faster or greater level of ketosis immediately post-injury in the injured animals. They did see it in the non-injured animals, which is an interesting observation from that study, and there might be some reasons for that. But they did see an induction of ketosis, and they saw that these animals, when they looked at the tissues following the study, that there was greater survival of the neurons and their axons in the dorsal corticospinal tract of these animals. And this is an area that's involved in skilled forelimb movement. So this was also coupled with improved motor function in the forelimbs of these animals. So they did some tests that allowed them to look at things like the ability for the animals to grab the food pellets and use their forelimbs naturally. And they did see that there was improvement in these behaviors as well. And Victoria, you asked about kind of what might be at play here. Well, the researchers didn't directly test the mechanism involved here, but they did say that they think it could be related to a signaling effect of the ketones themselves. So there's some previous data showing that HCAR2, which is a receptor that beta hydroxybutyrate, the primary ketone body, binds to, and it works to regulate the brain inflammatory response through this pathway. And there's some data suggesting that maybe this is part of the reason why you have improved survival of these neurons following this type of injury, at least in this animal model. So certainly a very fascinating area, and something that historically is difficult. There's not a lot of great options for in some cases, and so any progress in this area is really incredible, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when, obviously this is in animals, very different than
Yep.
in humans, but it's very exciting to see this kind of
Um,
shift for them and what that might mean if this could apply down the line to those who are suffering something like a spinal cord injury or traumatic brain
yeah.
injury. I think that's one of the most exciting areas of research with this because there's not really many
Yeah.
options. But if the patient has, the ability to use nutrition in a way that could improve their use of function or whatnot, that could be huge.
Absolutely.
And so that sort of brings us to really another fascinating area, I think, especially considering it's Mental Health Month.
Mhm.
Some of the research in the mental illness space, I think, is the most, honestly, the most exciting to me. for many reasons. But I think that it's exciting to learn a little bit more from, there's a variety of nutritional psychiatrists that are, at least, through case reports and, anecdotally, there's just a lot of exciting data there. But there's actually been some interesting stuff that's been published this past year. One of which was an article on the antidepressant effects of the ketogenic diet. It's actually titled "Antidepressant Effects of Ketogenic Diet Are Mediated via the Restoration of Microglial Activation and Neuronal Excitability in the lateral I can't even say that word, benula."
Yeah.
It's a tongue twister. Don't say that 5 times fast. But basically, this study showed that the ketogenic diet reduced depressive-like behaviors, as well as reducing abnormal neuronal excitability. And so while the research is sort of still in its infancy, and you kind of briefly touched on this previously in relation to the other study, talk a little bit more about the neurometabolic features that are thought to potentially be shared between several
Yeah.
mental illnesses.
Yeah, exactly. So, kind of some of the things we were already talking about, but one thing that we tend to see is kind of an imbalance um, in neurotransmitter signaling, and specifically some of the excitatory versus inhibitory neurotransmitters in the brain. These are often dysregulated in different conditions, including in various mental illness conditions. And then also, again, neuroinflammation does seem to be a common theme amongst these kind of disorders as well. And so in this study, this is another rodent study, and which is very important in research. So, sometimes when we're talking about this publicly, we it's so important to recognize that, we don't know if something works in humans until it's proven in humans, which is absolutely critical to understand. But we almost never know how something works until it's studied in animals, because that allows us to perform experiments that we obviously cannot perform in humans, and really get down to the nitty-gritty mechanistic details, which further, kind of supports our understanding of how this is actually working. And that's critically important from a scientist's perspective. And so I thought this was a really cool paper. They used 2 different model systems of depression. So one was called the repeated social defeat stress model, and the other one was lipopolysaccharide, or LPS, kind of infection model. Both are shown to cause depressive-like behaviors in rodents through seemingly, different etiologies. And what they showed was the ketogenic diet really dramatically reduced the depressive-like behaviors in both of these models. And they used a couple of different tests to evaluate that. And they also saw that in some relevant brain regions, they saw a restoration of neuronal excitability and microglial inflammation, which were both heightened in the depressive models when they were not treated. And ketogenic diet basically brought these back to a more normal state. So again, the authors are saying they think that these mechanisms might be at play here, kind of explaining why these animals might have these antidepressive-like behaviors because of these mechanistic effects going on.
Yeah, it's really such a fascinating area of research. And much like you said, it just because it's done in animals doesn't mean that it kind of links over to humans. But an interesting study nonetheless, and worth exploring a little bit more. And one physician actually who works with mental health patients, I would highly recommend checking out his work. Dr. Chris Palmer, he's done a slew of papers. Actually, he's published quite a few this past year that are worth a read. He talks a lot about his schizophrenic patients, which is sort of something that no one ever really thought nutrition might affect. And he's seen some incredible, he's actually published some of the data where he's seen patients go back to normal functioning, becoming people within society that they didn't really think they could be a functioning member prior to. So, everybody's different. You got to work with your doctor for sure, but it's an exciting area. And yeah, I'm excited to see where the research takes us in 2021 as well. Switching gears, let's talk a little bit more about cancer, sort of your wheelhouse, and some of the research that went down in 2020. Metabolic therapies are showing a lot of promise, I would say. as sort of an exciting new potential treatment alongside maybe standard of care. But the relationship between ketosis and cancer is a lot more complex than I think people sometimes sort of how they reference it. It's more
Yeah.
than just its glucose lowering effects. It actually may impact cancer at the cellular level, which
Mhm.
brings me to this specific article that I think is really fascinating, involving glioma stem cells, stem-like cells.
Mm.
Um, and so let's dive into this a little bit. The article is titled "A Ketogenic Diet Attenuates Proliferation and Stenos of Glioma Stem-like Cells by Altering Metabolism, Resulting in Increased ROS Production."
Yeah.
So let's talk about how this was sort of studied and what effects in this were actually observed.
Yeah. So this is a cool study. So glioma stem-like cells, these are a subpopulation within the tumor that have stem cell-like characteristics. So some of those that are relevant would be upregulation of important markers that kind of designate stemness, enhanced self-renewal, so the ability to continue dividing, which may sound familiar. This is a feature of cancer cells and also a feature of stem cells, and also tumorigenic ability. So these are thought to be the cells within the tumor itself that are responsible for resistance to chemotherapy drugs and also recurrence following perhaps a resection or treatment, successful treatment. And it's thought that these cells, these glioma, these stem-like cells within a tumor, and in this case, glioma specifically is what they were studying, are really, critical for repopulating the tumor and making a more aggressive kind of cancer. So what they did was they took these glioma stem-like cells both from patient biopsies, and then they also looked at a commercially available glioma stem cell line. And they grew them in the presence of low glucose and supplemented ketones, so to kind of mimic this ketogenic diet type condition. So they looked at their ability to form what's called neurospheres in culture, and this is thought to kind of reflect this tumorigenic potential, so the propensity for that particular cell to be able to form kind of a new tumor. And the conditions, the ketogenic diet conditions in the cell culture really dramatically reduce this ability to form neurospheres in the glioma stem-like cells. And interestingly, did not affect the normal neuronal stem cells from doing so. So
Wow.
that's a really cool feature to this study for sure. Furthermore, they saw that the ketogenic diet type conditions were able to reduce the proliferation or division rate of those glioma stem-like cells and also induce apoptosis or cell death. And then they also saw that when you looked at the type of markers that these glioma stem-like cells were expressing, they saw a reduction in these stemness markers. So again, kind of further supporting that these cells are being affected in a way that maybe reduces their stemness and their capability to function like stem cells.
Wow, it's a pretty interesting study in and of itself. I think maybe for those who don't know, it might be helpful to explain a little bit more about what ROS is exactly and how that might play sort of a therapeutic role, um,
Yeah.
in the process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was an important part of this study too. They were seeing these effects on the function of these cells, and then they also wanted to kind of dive into what's a mechanism at play here. And so what they saw was the ketogenic diet type conditions increased ROS, or reactive oxygen species, production within these glioma stem-like cells. So ROS are these highly reactive molecules that are produced normally in our tissues but can be overproduced and cause tissue damage. Now, this is a bad thing if you're talking about our healthy tissue and you don't want excessive ROS or oxidative stress going on. But in cancer can be very susceptible to enhanced ROS and oxidative stress. And in fact, many therapies work, at least in part, by causing the cancer cell to overexpress ROS. And so that's actually what this study showed the ketogenic diet was doing. And it's fascinating because typically in healthy tissue, we see a reduction in ROS with ketosis. So very interesting, definitely a
Wow.
differential response here. But in these glioma stem-like cells, we saw more ROS being produced. And to further support the notion that this was the mechanism at play, the researchers were able to block the therapeutic effects of the ketogenic diet to these cells by blocking the ROS production with a ROS scavenger. So further kind of lending credence that this is probably a really important mechanism.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to kind of talk a little bit more about a study that actually involved patients, because that's interesting for people to kind of hear a little bit more about as well. There was this study that was done by researchers that involved low carb ketogenic diets, but also monitored things like quality of life, which I think is so important in the process to research. One of the things that I think is most empowering about cancer research involving metabolic therapies is the potential for it to provide empowerment to the patient, right? Many people don't feel like they have an active role often. So this study in particular, actually, it's called Low Carb and Ketogenic Diets Increase Quality of Life, Physical Performance, Body Composition, and Metabolic Health of Women with Breast Cancer Better Than a Standard Diet, and involved actually 152 breast cancer patients. And I definitely want to dive into this one a little bit more so in terms of, how they measured quality of life and overall physical functioning, and what researchers kind of found, which was pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, they had these 152 women with breast cancer, and they were following either a standard diet, deemed a healthy standard diet, so kind of more whole foods based, nutritious dense foods, but a higher carbohydrate content, a low carbohydrate diet, or a low carb ketogenic diet for 20 weeks. They found that all three of these diets were feasible, didn't have adverse effects in the patients that they were studying, and all had some improvements in quality of life, body composition, and physical function. But the ketogenic diet in particular was superior in its effects in improving fatigue, insomnia, physical function, and really resulted in the best physical performance and highest muscle to fat ratio. And then also the ketogenic diet had the best triglyceride to HDL ratio and the best HOMA-IR score, and this is a marker of insulin resistance. And so you asked about kind of how they were measuring these things, this quality of life. And so in this study in particular, they were using this standardized and validated quality of life questionnaire. It's called the EORTC QLQ C30. And it's a questionnaire that was designed to assess quality of life in cancer patients. And it's been used in more than 5,000 research studies and validated in over 100 languages, which is pretty incredible.
Wow.
So that's what they were using to measure quality of life. And then for physical function, the quality of life questionnaire also includes some detailed questions about physical function and daily living activities. But they also had a program there that included an exercise protocol. So they were comparing kind of performance in that protocol as well.
Well, those are pretty incredible findings, I think, just in terms of what that means, if this is something that's implemented down the line, maybe in combination with standard of care for patients. I just think quality of life, as I mentioned, is so important. During my research my time with Epigenics Foundation, we had a pilot study going on with neuro-oncologist Dr. Jethro Hu at Cedars-Sinai. And I will say one of the most incredible sort of results of having some of his patients on a ketogenic diet. Maybe you didn't see improvement when it comes to the cancer itself, but in many cases we did see that. However, I think one of the most incredible components was how it shifted their mood, how it literally provided them with this sort of motivation and feeling of being able to be a part of their treatment process. And I think that mindset in and of itself, that sort of shift going from feeling like you can't maybe do something to being an active member in your protocol, what that does in the healing process, I think is huge. So I really love what researchers did there in that study. Let's talk about metabolic dysfunction research, because this is probably a field of medicine that I think is experiencing some of the most benefit from metabolic therapies. Just, I think that it's exciting. This is the area of research you hear the most about: diabetes, obesity, things along those lines. So let's talk a little bit more though about PCOS, because I think this is really an interesting area, specifically because PCOS is really tightly linked with insulin resistance and inflammation. And researchers in this particular article, titled Effects of a Ketogenic Diet in Overweight Women with Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome, really found some interesting findings. If you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a really cool article, and this is an area of research that's had a lot of conversation around it, but really kind of needed some more publications to
Right.
kind of move this field forward. And so this was a study, I think, in 14 overweight women with PCOS, and they implemented a Mediterranean style ketogenic diet that was supplemented with a host of phytoextracts. And so they saw really a diverse set of improvements in this group. So they saw a reduction in body weight, BMI, fat body mass, visceral adipose, blood glucose, blood
Wow.
insulin, triglycerides, total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol. And then they saw improvements in several of these hormones that are typically dysregulated in PCOS. So including the LH to FSH ratio, LH total, free testosterone, and DHES blood levels as well.
Just a few
Also,
markers.
yeah, just a little bit. And they also saw an improvement in HOMA-IR, so this marker of insulin
Wow.
resistance. And then they also saw a trend towards a reduction in the excessive body hair growth that is a typical problem with PCOS as well. So
Wow.
very successful study there. And I would be surprised if we don't have some bigger clinical trials coming on the heels of this exciting research.
Yeah, that's really exciting, just because I know there's, you hear a lot about a lot of women who sort of suffer from PCOS. And I think the current sort of standard is reduced caloric intake. But if you could get a little more hyper specific,
Mhm.
that could be pretty life changing for a lot of people, I think. Another area of research, we got human optimization and aging here. And by the way, each of these, if you access this ebook online, it doesn't disappear when you have the PDF version, but we list all of the key findings for all of these studies, as well as hyperlinking all of these research articles. So it's really great if you want to read more about one particular study. We're kind of skimming through it right now, but let's talk a little bit about intermittent fasting. This is obviously a huge area of interest for a lot of people because of its potential longevity effects. There was this one particular article, Intermittent Fasting Enhanced the Cognitive Function in Older Adults with Mild Cognitive Impairment by Inducing Biochemical and Metabolic Changes, a 3-year progressive study. And this is really interesting what researchers found. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what this study showed?
Yeah, this is a really cool study. So they were able to look at patients that performed either regular or irregular intermittent fasts. So in this population specifically, they were doing Monday and Thursday sunrise to sunset fasts for religious purposes. And so what they found was that those individuals that regularly fasted over this 36-month period were more likely to age successfully without cognitive impairment compared to those who were irregularly fasting or non-fasters.
Hmm.
And regular fasters also showed improvements in other things like body weight, insulin, fasting blood glucose, and then also markers of oxidative stress and inflammation.
Wow. That's pretty powerful there. I mean, it's obviously all the buzz right now is talking about fasting. There's even applications that help you with it.
Yeah.
And it's exciting to see where this research is really headed and all the potential benefits and what it might mean for giving sort of your gut digestive system a rest. I know
Yeah.
I personally use it and feel the benefits, but seeing publications like this really kind of continue to set it in stone and lead the way to what that might mean for people down the line, especially older adults too. So let's talk now. There's so much great information in here. I know we don't have too much time today to get, I would love to go through all of these, to be honest, but there's some other really interesting publications on Alzheimer's. I highly recommend you check this out. Obviously, that's something that affects a lot of people, and there's just some fascinating work being done in that space specifically. But I want to talk about the clinical research, because this is, I think, a really important area where we really have to understand the nuances, including potential complications, because if we're just talking about the positives and and not providing all of the sides to what this actually looks like in the real world, or at least, on the research side, I think, we're not doing our job. So we have to provide this information. So let's talk a little bit about that. One article in particular that I find really interesting is Lactation Ketoacidosis, a systematic review of case reports. Uh, Tell me a little bit more about what this review is addressing. This is a hot topic because a lot of moms, new moms,
Mhm.
pregnant people are talking about the ketogenic diet. And I think this opens up, a good
Yep.
conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really important conversation. I'm a breastfeeding mom myself, so it's near and dear to my heart as well. And it's
Right.
something that's been kind of talked about, here and there, but we're now collecting more and more data to understand this. And I think it's important people are aware, but then also really important clinicians are aware. This was a systematic review. So I went back and looked at the literature and pulled out all of the reports of this, what they're calling lactation ketoacidosis. So
Mm.
seeing that in some women that are breastfeeding moms, often those that are also currently going through a calorie restriction and exercise program trying to lose weight postpartum, they found 18 patients in 16 different case reports and one case series that reported experiencing lactation ketoacidosis and presenting with as kind of this classic ketoacidosis issue. They were treated with things like IV dextrose, sodium bicarb, insulin, rehydration, monitoring and replacement of electrolytes, and resumption of a more balanced diet. And thankfully, the prognosis was good in all of these cases. But this was, a small number, but definitely something present and something that people need to be aware of. And again, specifically, clinicians need to be aware of as
Right.
a potential issue out there. As the conversation around low carb and ketogenic diets increases, we got to be aware of kind of all the nuances surrounding that.
Yeah, so many questions pop into my head when it comes to that study in particular, just, from what kind of diet they were following previously to, underlying conditions to you name it. We could talk about that one for hours, I think. But
Absolutely.
I definitely suggest I mean, this book contains so much more than what we've talked about. We've just barely skimmed the surface. And I really think, not only does it include research articles, but we also provide some links at the ends to some literature reviews, which are really helpful as well. So I highly recommend, if you haven't checked it out, check it out. Go to our website, metabolichealthsummit.com. Under the video section, you can find the ebook. You can always email us too if you want a direct link, just info@metabolichealthsummit.com. But this is just the start really of our increased effort, I would say, to provide even more digital education in a different way beyond just our live conference once a year. I think that conference is so important when it comes to the networking, the collaboration, the information, just the energy overall. But there's something to be said about reaching people in this way as well. So if you haven't checked it out, make sure you check it out. If you have any questions, please comment below. We'll absolutely be sure to answer those questions. And we're going to be going live again here very soon. But thanks for diving into this book with me, Angela.
Thanks. It was lots of fun. I
It
always
was,
like talking about the science.
I could probably talk for 2 more hours, but I won't. And we will see everybody very soon. Make sure you follow along. We'll be updating you guys with content here in the very near future. So we'll see you soon.
See you soon.